A poor single mom texted a billionaire by mistake asking for baby formula money. What happened next? The apartment was silent, except for the sound of an infant's cries echoing through thin walls. The kind of sound that clawed at a mother's chest, urgent, unrelenting, impossible to ignore. On the kitchen floor sat Mira Jensen, her back pressed against a cabinet, her knees pulled tight to her chest. The air was heavy, and the darkness wasn't a choice. It was the power company's notice made real. The only light came from a crooked street lamp outside, throwing a weak beam across the room. On the counter, an empty tin of baby formula lay discarded, its metallic ring mocking her with every glance. Tonight her son's bottle had been filled mostly with water, and still he cried, too young to understand why his stomach ached, too small to know how close his mother was to breaking. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone. She didn't want to press her brother's name again. Each time she had, his voice grew colder, his patience thinner. But Noah was hungry, and pride didn't silence hunger. She typed a message with trembling thumbs. "Ben, I'm sorry to ask again. I need $50 for formula. I'll pay you back Friday when my check clears. Please." She hit send without checking twice, leaned back against the cabinet, and closed her eyes. Defeat pressed in on her chest. She had become the woman she promised herself she'd never be, the one always asking, always needing, always falling short. The phone buzzed 5 minutes later. Relief surged, but when she opened the screen, her heart sank. "I think you sent this to the wrong person." Her chest tightened, one digit off. She had begged a stranger. Shame burned her face. She quickly typed back, "I'm so sorry. Wrong number, please ignore." She locked the phone and tossed it aside, pulling the blanket over her shoulders as if it could shield her from the humiliation. Another failure, another reminder of how far she had fallen. Then the phone buzzed again. Slowly, she picked it up. "Is your baby going to be okay?" Her pulse jumped. Who asks a question like that? Not the kind of stranger she expected. She typed quickly, "We'll manage. Sorry again." The reply came almost instantly. "I can help. No strings." She laughed bitterly under her breath. "Help? From a stranger?" She typed back, "Thanks, but I don't take money from people I don't know." The response was calm. "Smart, but my name's Jackson. Now I'm not a stranger." Her thumb hovered over the screen. Noah's cries grew louder from the bedroom. She wanted to block the number. Shut it all out. But she was tired of being broke, tired of making bottles with more water than powder, tired of pretending that she could stretch nothing into enough. She did something she had never done before. She sent him her payment details. 3 seconds later, her phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't a message, it was a transfer notification. She stared at the numbers on the screen, certain she was seeing wrong. Not $50, not even 100, 5,000. Her breath caught. She blinked twice, checked the app again. $5,000, sitting in her account. Her mouth went dry. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "This is too much. I only asked for 50. The reply came quickly. "It's already yours. No catch." One less thing to worry about. Mira's grip on the phone faltered, her body trembling in the dark kitchen. She hadn't cried when she lost her job. She hadn't cried when her car was repossessed. She hadn't cried when Noah's father disappeared without a word. But now, staring at the glow of her phone, the tears came, hot and unstoppable. For the first time in months, she whispered aloud, "Thank you." No response came this time. The phone went dark. But her life had already shifted, and she didn't even realize it yet. Because the man on the other end of that text wasn't just anyone, and Mira Jensen was about to step into a world she never imagined. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to Souls and Riches Stories channel, and drop in the comments what country you're watching from. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. The name glowed back at her, Jackson Albright, and the next message would leave her frozen in place. The transfer notification glowed like a mistake that hadn't yet been corrected. Mira sat frozen in the kitchen, staring at the numbers until her eyes blurred. $5,000. Not a loan, not a promise of repayment later, already cleared into her account. Her mind churned through every warning she'd ever heard. No one sends that kind of money without expecting something in return. What if it was a scam? What if giving her details had just invited trouble into her life? Her stomach twisted. She considered sending it back immediately, but the reality pressed harder than suspicion. Noah was still crying. The formula can was still empty. And in that moment, fear and gratitude collided in her chest. She pulled her knees tighter to her chest, clutching the phone as tears slid silently down her face. For weeks, she had fought not to cry, convincing herself she had to stay strong. Tonight, the dam finally broke. She carried Noah from his crib, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. His tiny fists gripped her shirt as she swayed in the dark. She didn't tell him about the stranger's text. She didn't say that for the first time in a long time. She felt the faint spark of something she had almost forgotten: hope. By morning, exhaustion weighed her down. She hadn't slept, not really. She'd been listening for the sound of the phone buzzing again, for the catch, the trick, the request for something she couldn't give. But instead, a knock rattled the front door. Her heart stopped. No one knocked here. Her landlord texted when he wanted rent. Neighbors kept to themselves. She hesitated before stepping closer, peering through the peephole. A delivery driver in a uniform stood outside, clipboard in hand, boxes stacked behind him. "Delivery for Mira Jensen?" he asked when she cracked the door open. She froze. "I didn't order anything." He shrugged. "Check the slip. Paid in full. Need your signature." Her hand shook as she scribbled on the line. He left the boxes just inside the doorway, offered a polite nod, and walked away. Mira stared at the packages as if they might vanish. Slowly, she cut one open. Formula. More cans than she could count, stacked neatly. All the brands she had once walked past in grocery aisles knowing she couldn't afford them. The second box held diapers. The third, wipes, bottles, puree packets, even a set of tiny clothes still smelling faintly of cotton and newness. It wasn't just formula. It was everything a child could need. At the very bottom of the final box sat a plain white envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single note written in firm, clean handwriting. "He should have what he needs. Noah deserves better than barely getting by, Jackson." She sat back on her heels, clutching the paper. He knew her son's name. She hadn't told him. She remembered staring at the earlier messages, certain she hadn't typed it. A shiver crept up her spine. How did he know? She carried the supplies into the living room, setting them down carefully, almost reverently. They didn't feel real. For hours she didn't touch them again. She just sat, rocking Noah, staring at the boxes that now stood in sharp contrast to the peeling paint and cracked linoleum of her apartment. The tears returned, not from fear this time, but from the aching relief of watching her baby finally drink a full bottle. His eyelids grew heavy, his small body relaxing against her arms, each breath steady, content, safe. The sound of silence filled the room, not the silence of hunger, but the silence of peace. And in that quiet, her mind turned to the man whose name she now knew, Jackson Albright. A stranger who wasn't really a stranger at all. Her thoughts twisted. Who spends thousands on a woman he's never met? Why her? What was the reason? She couldn't shake the suspicion that this was only the beginning, and not knowing what came next unsettled her more than the hunger ever had. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. But hope laced with fear is a dangerous thing, and she knew both emotions would haunt her until she found out the truth about the man who had just stepped, uninvited, into her life. The apartment was quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt too fragile to trust. Noah had finally fallen asleep after a full bottle, his tiny breaths steady against the pillow. The boxes still sat in the corner of the living room, stacked like silent guardians. Mira hadn't unpacked most of them. She couldn't bring herself to. Part of her still believed they might disappear if she looked away too long. Her phone rested on the table, its screen dark. The note in her lap weighed more than paper should. Noah deserves better than barely getting by. The words kept circling in her mind. He knew her son's name. That detail lodged deep in her chest, pressing against every ounce of suspicion she carried. She opened her browser. Her fingers hovered for a moment before she finally typed, Jackson Albright. The results filled the screen faster than she was ready for. Article after article, profile after profile. Words jumped out. CEO of Helix Core Industries. Net worth, $11.8 billion. Former military, media shy, widower, no children. A man whose influence stretched across medicine, tech, and finance. A man who could buy 100 buildings like hers and not feel the dent. Her breath caught as she scrolled through the few photos available. They called him the ghost mogul. Rarely photographed, never interviewed, always avoiding cameras. In one image, he was leaving a Senate hearing, his jaw tight, eyes hard, suit immaculate. He looked untouchable. Nothing like the stranger who had just sent her $5,000 and a mountain of supplies for her son. Mira shut the screen quickly, her pulse racing. This wasn't possible. Why would someone like that respond to her desperate mistake of a text? Why her? Gratitude tangled with unease. She wanted to believe it was kindness, pure and simple. But experience had taught her nothing came free. Every favor had a price, even from family. Accepting help had always meant debt. And now she owed something to a man who lived in a world she couldn't even imagine stepping into. The phone buzzed on the table. Her chest tightened as she picked it up. Did the boxes arrive? Her thumbs hesitated before replying. Yes. I don't even know how to thank you. You don't have to. Why though? Why help me? You don't even know me. There was a long pause. The screen stayed dark, and she thought the conversation was over. She set the phone aside, her heartbeat slowing, disappointment settling like dust. Then it lit up again. Because once upon a time, someone helped me when they didn't have to. I never forgot it. Mira stared at the words, her throat tightening. She leaned back against the wall, Noah's soft breathing filling the silence. A billionaire confessing that he once needed saving. It didn't fit the picture she had just seen online. It didn't match the headlines or the photos of polished boardrooms and Senate hearings. It made him human, and that was more disarming than the money. Her fingers hovered again. She wanted to ask, saved from what? But she swallowed the question, afraid of crossing into places she wasn't meant to go. Instead, she typed, "Then let me pay you back. I don't want to owe anyone." The reply came fast. For what? For the formula? For listening? "You don't owe me." She frowned. Pride and gratitude warred inside her. "I'll figure out a way. Somehow." Another pause, shorter this time. "Tell me what kind of formula Noah needs. I'll send more. Not money, supplies." Her eyes stung as she typed, "Only if it's really no strings." "I don't do strings," came the response. "Strings are for people playing games." She exhaled slowly, her shoulders sinking. She didn't know what to believe, but for tonight, she wanted to believe him. Hours later, when Noah stirred and she rocked him gently back to sleep, the phone buzzed one final time. "Do you work?" The question struck harder than she expected. Her hands hovered before answering. "I did. Biochem research, diagnostics. But the company shut down, daycare closed, and I couldn't keep up. So no, not right now." A minute passed, then two. She thought he might not reply. Then the message came. "Come by Helix Core tomorrow, 11 a.m., ask for Ava. No strings, just a conversation." Her chest tightened. She reread the words again and again, her pulse racing. A billionaire who had every reason to ignore her was inviting her into his world. And she had no idea whether stepping through that door would save her or destroy the fragile balance she had left. Morning arrived too quickly. But Mira didn't have the luxury of hesitating. She stood in front of her closet, scanning clothes that bore the wear of too many laundromat cycles. Nothing looked like it belonged in a corporate tower. Still, she chose her cleanest blouse, pressed her jeans flat with the weight of her hands, and slipped on a blazer that hadn't zipped since before Noah's birth. Her reflection whispered doubt, but there was no turning back. With Noah strapped into a sling across her chest, she stepped onto the bus headed downtown. The ride felt longer than usual. Every stop a reminder that she was moving further away from the world she knew and closer to one she had only ever seen from a distance. Through the scratched windows, the skyline rose, glass and steel towers glittering against the morning sun. And somewhere among them stood Helix Core, the empire built by the man who had turned her life upside down with a single text. When she stepped off the bus, the building loomed above her like a monument. It wasn't gaudy, not the kind of excess she expected from a billionaire. Instead, it was sharp, efficient, designed for function, but still impossible to ignore. Its glass facade reflected the city around it, making it appear untouchable. She swallowed hard and walked toward the revolving doors. The lobby stole her breath. High ceilings stretched overhead, polished floors gleamed like mirrors, and a quiet hum of activity filled the air. But it wasn't the grandeur that unsettled her. It was the way people looked at her. Not with pity, not with disdain, but with acknowledgement, as though she had a right to be there. The receptionist greeted her by name before she even spoke. "Welcome, Miss Jensen, you're expected, 37th floor." Expected. The word rattled her. She followed the marble path to the elevator. Noah stirred softly against her chest, and she whispered reassurance more for herself than for him. When the elevator doors opened, a woman stood waiting. Mid-40s, sleek black hair, tablet in hand, smile warm but authoritative. "Mira Jensen, I'm Ava Lynn, Chief of Staff to Mr. Albright. It's good to finally meet you." "Finally?" Mira echoed. Ava's smile deepened. "Yes, he's mentioned you." Confusion clouded her thoughts, but Ava didn't pause. She guided Mira down a hallway lined with glass offices. Everything gleamed with quiet efficiency. Staff members moved quickly but without chaos, each nodding politely as they passed. No one looked twice at Noah. It was as though the sight of a baby in the halls of a billion-dollar corporation was perfectly natural. Ava stopped at a wide oak door and pressed a key card against the lock. "Before anything else, Mr. Albright wanted you to see this." The door swung open, and Mira stepped inside. What she saw made her heart ache. The room wasn't an office, it was a nursery. A crib stood in the corner, next to a changing table stocked with wipes and diapers. Soft rugs covered the floor, toys filled woven baskets, and blackout curtains hung neatly across the windows. It wasn't flashy, it was thoughtful. Every detail spoke of someone who had considered what a child might need, what a mother might need, to feel at ease in a place like this. Mira pressed a hand to her mouth, emotions swelling in her chest. Why would he? Ava's voice was gentle. Because he understands walking into the unknown with no safety net. He wanted you to know that your son is welcome here. Tears blurred her vision as she stepped further into the room. Noah cooed softly, reaching toward the mobile dangling above the crib. For a moment, the world fell away, and she could breathe without the weight of hunger or fear pressing down on her. She turned to Ava, her voice unsteady. I don't understand. Why me? Ava's eyes held hers, calm but unreadable. Because he believes in investing where others wouldn't bother looking. The words lingered as Ava guided her to a smaller meeting room down the hall. She offered coffee, a chair, space to settle. Noah drifted back to sleep in the sling, unaware of the chasm his mother had just crossed between one world and another. Minutes passed in quiet anticipation. Every second tightened the knot in her stomach. She rehearsed excuses, imagined reasons to leave, convinced herself this was too much, too strange. But before she could decide, the door opened. Mira looked up, and there he was. Jackson Albright stepped into the room. Jackson Albright carried none of the polish of the photographs Mira had seen online. He looked real, tall, sharp-featured, expensive in posture more than in clothing. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the forearms, his tie loosened as though he had been working longer than most people stayed awake. The gravity of his presence filled the room, but it wasn't arrogance. It was something quieter, weight pressed into every gesture. Mira, he said, as if they were already acquainted. Her throat tightened. Mr. Albright. He shook his head once. Jackson. He settled into the chair across from her, forearms resting on the table, gaze steady but not unkind. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was assessing. Finally, he leaned forward slightly. Before anything else, I want to be clear. You owe me nothing. The words landed heavier than she expected. Nothing. She had been bracing herself for the hook, the hidden demand, the inevitable price. Instead, the man who could have asked for anything insisted she owed him nothing. Her voice wavered. Why would you do all this then? People don't just... I don't believe in charity, Jackson interrupted, but I do believe in investing in people. You didn't ask for a handout. You didn't hint at more. You were willing to go without before you let your child suffer. That tells me something about who you are. Mira shifted uncomfortably. His words pressed against the walls she had built around her pride. I can't be anyone's project. I've spent too long fighting not to be pitied. His expression didn't change. This isn't pity. It's opportunity. Temporary, if you want it that way. She blinked. Opportunity? Jackson reached for a folder on the table and slid it across to her. Inside, crisp documents outlined a position. Audit support. 3 months, flexible hours, with the option to work on-site or remotely. Compensation higher than anything she had earned before. The final line stunned her most. On-site childcare provided. Her eyes darted from the folder to him. This isn't real. It's real, he said evenly. Helix Core is too large for me to ignore small cracks. I need fresh eyes, someone who doesn't already owe loyalty inside these walls. You fit that, and if it doesn't work, you walk away. No penalty, no explanation. Mira's hands trembled as she turned the pages. Everything about the offer screamed risk. Walking into his world meant exposing herself, risking the little stability she had scraped together. But then her gaze fell on Noah, sleeping peacefully in the sling against her chest, his face soft and content after weeks of hunger and need. Her chest ached. This wasn't about her anymore. I don't know if I'm qualified, she said quietly. You are, Jackson replied without hesitation. I've seen your background, biochem research, diagnostics. You know systems, you know details. That's all I need. Her stomach tightened. You looked into me? I don't invite strangers into my company blind. His tone was matter of fact, not defensive. But what I found only confirmed what I saw in your first message, resilience. Her pride screamed to push the folder back across the table, to refuse, to prove she could climb out of her circumstances alone. But pride had never fed Noah. Pride hadn't kept the lights on, and pride wasn't going to buy him a future. She drew a shaky breath. I'm not agreeing for me. I'm agreeing for him. Jackson's gaze softened, though his voice remained steady. That's the only reason worth agreeing. For the first time since this strange story began, Mira felt her resistance crack. The weight of exhaustion, of endless struggle, began to lift, just enough to glimpse what life might look like if she accepted. She closed the folder slowly and nodded once. I'll take it. Jackson leaned back, almost as if he had expected no other answer. Then you start tomorrow. Ava will set everything in motion. You'll have what you need. The simplicity of his words struck her. No fanfare. No bargaining. Just certainty. As she rose to leave, Noah stirred, his small hand brushing against the edge of the folder. Mira pressed the file against her chest and whispered a silent promise. This wasn't surrender. It was survival. For him, for her, for the future she refused to believe was already lost. And as the door closed behind her, the thought lingered. For the first time in years, someone had looked at her and seen more than struggle. The next morning, Mira stood in front of Helix Core's entrance with Noah resting against her chest, his tiny breaths warm beneath the sling. A rush of nerves tightened her stomach, but she forced herself forward. This wasn't about appearances or impressions anymore. This was about proving she was more than desperation. The receptionist greeted her by name again, as though she had worked there for years. The elevator carried her to the top floors, where Ava was already waiting with a coffee in hand. "Your office is ready," Ava said with an efficient smile, motioning her down the glass-lined corridor. The space Ava opened for her was modest but striking. Wide desk, dual monitors, shelves already stocked with supplies. A clear panel overlooked the nursery next door, where Noah now stirred happily at the sight of new toys scattered on a rug. Relief hit her harder than expected. She could work without the gnawing worry of leaving him behind. Mira slid into the chair, fingers hovering over the keyboard. It had been nearly 2 years since she had last touched audit files, but as she logged into Helix's internal systems, something inside her stirred. Lines of data appeared on the screen, familiar in a way she hadn't felt in months. She adjusted her posture, eyes narrowing, and began working through the introductory folders Ava had set up. Hours passed unnoticed. Numbers became patterns. Patterns turned into questions. She remembered the feel of this work, methodical, demanding, a puzzle that begged to be solved. The further she moved through vendor payouts and reconciliations, the sharper her instincts became. By midday, she had already flagged 3 payments that didn't sit right. Nothing glaring, nothing obvious. Small vendor transfers tucked under thresholds that normally escaped attention. They were spread across departments, masked by legitimate invoices. To anyone glancing, they looked routine. But Mira knew better. They weren't. Her chest tightened. She wasn't here just to shuffle numbers. This wasn't busy work. She was looking at something that wasn't supposed to be found. As she leaned back to clear her thoughts, a soft ping sounded from the internal messenger. A private message appeared at the corner of her screen. "Jackson Bright, keep what you find between us. If anything looks off, bring it to me directly. No one else. Not even Ava." The words lit up the monitor like a spotlight. Mira's pulse quickened. She glanced instinctively toward the glass wall. Noah was asleep, his small chest rising and falling, untouched by the storm brewing in her head. She typed back carefully. "Do you expect me to find something?" The reply was immediate. "I expect you to see what others miss." Her palms grew damp. Whatever this job was, it wasn't the lifeline she thought it would be. It was bigger, riskier. Jackson hadn't hired her out of kindness alone. He needed her, and that realization unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The rest of the afternoon blurred into quiet intensity. Mira pored over spreadsheets, cross-checking codes against project records, pulling strings most employees wouldn't dare tug. The anomalies multiplied. Nothing large enough to trigger alarms, but consistent enough to form a pattern. Someone inside Helix Core was moving money under cover of the company's size. Someone confident no one would notice. The tension in her chest deepened. This wasn't just accounting. This was exposure. And if she was right, she had just stepped into the kind of storm that could drown anyone caught in it. She rubbed her eyes and leaned back, exhaustion creeping in. The office was still, the glow from her monitor the only light. Across the glass, Noah slept curled on a rug with a stuffed fox tucked against his cheek. The sight steadied her, reminded her why she couldn't turn back. Her phone buzzed quietly. Another message from Jackson. "Trust your instincts. They'll take you further than loyalty ever will." Mira's grip tightened on the device. She didn't know if this path would save her or trap her, but one truth was becoming clearer by the hour. Helix Core wasn't flawless, and Jackson Albright had chosen her not just to work, but to uncover what others refused to see. And with each keystroke, she realized her presence here was far more dangerous and far more important than she had ever imagined. Days slipped into a rhythm Mira hadn't known she missed. Each morning began with coffee waiting on her desk. Noah happily settled in the nursery and a stack of files queued in her system. But beneath the order lay a growing unease. The deeper she dug, the less the numbers made sense. What first appeared as random vendor mistakes had begun to align into a pattern. Small transfers, always just under the threshold that triggered audits, scattered across multiple departments. At first she thought it was incompetence. But repetition told a different story. These weren't errors, they were deliberate. Her stomach knotted as she highlighted line after line, building a private folder of suspicious entries. Whoever orchestrated this knew how to mask the trail. Payments were buried inside legitimate projects, names disguised with minor variations, invoices designed to look routine. It was subtle, clever, and systematic. But subtle theft adds up. Over the course of a quarter, the amounts reached into the millions. She sat back, heart pounding. This wasn't what she had signed up for. She had expected data entry, maybe reconciling mistakes, something safe, something that wouldn't put her in anyone's crosshairs. Instead, she had stumbled into embezzlement. The thought struck her hard. If someone inside Helix Core was stealing this much, exposing it could mean making enemies powerful enough to crush her. She glanced through the glass at Noah, asleep on his blanket, peaceful in the way only children could be. A wave of fear pressed through her. What if she brought danger closer to him by staying? Her messenger pinged. A message flashed across her screen. "Jackson Bright? You're seeing it, aren't you?" Her pulse jumped. She hesitated before typing. "I think so. These payments don't add up. But if I'm right, someone in your company is stealing from you." The reply came seconds later. "That's why I asked for your eyes. I trust them more than theirs." Mira stared at the words. More than theirs. The implication settled deep. He wasn't just testing her skills, he was depending on her in a way he didn't with the people already around him. The thought carried both weight and danger. That night, long after Noah had fallen asleep and the office stood empty, another message appeared. "Jackson, still working?" She typed back quickly, trying to make sense of this. "It's bigger than I thought. Jackson. It always is. I learned that when I was younger. Loss has a way of teaching you what survival really means." Her fingers lingered on the keyboard before replying. "Loss?" There was a long pause. "Jackson? I lost someone I couldn't save. It's why I never ignore what others overlook. Resilience isn't about strength. It's about surviving when no one else expects you to." Mira leaned back in her chair, the glow of the screen reflecting in her tired eyes. She thought of the nights she had rocked Noah to sleep on an empty stomach, of bills shoved into drawers, of the humiliation of asking for help again and again. He wasn't wrong. Resilience wasn't a choice. It was the only option she had ever had. Her reply was simple. "I know what that feels like." From that night forward, their conversations deepened, short messages shared in quiet hours, fragments of grief, resilience, and survival. It was strange how easily trust formed in the spaces between words. She had expected distance, power, intimidation. Instead, she found something else, recognition. Still, the work pulled her forward. The files refused to let her rest. She couldn't walk away now, not when the truth stared back at her from the screen. By the end of her second week, she found it. The pattern led to one name repeated too often to be coincidence. A senior executive whose department processed hundreds of contracts a month. Buried within them were ghost vendors, non-existent projects, and payouts that had quietly siphoned millions into accounts Mira couldn't yet trace. Her blood ran cold as she highlighted the entry, her hand trembling over the mouse. This wasn't a low-level scam. This was someone high enough to be untouchable. Someone who would notice if she kept digging. And now she had to decide, expose it and risk everything, or bury it and pretend she had never seen. Her screen buzzed with another message from Jackson. "What did you find?" Mira's eyes locked on the name glowing back at her from the files. And in that moment, she realized the shadows inside Helix Core were deeper and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Mira sat at her desk long after the office lights dimmed, her eyes fixed on the name glowing across her screen. The numbers told a story she couldn't ignore. This wasn't a clerical error, it was theft. Millions moved quietly under the cover of legitimate contracts, tied to an executive whose signature carried weight inside Helix Core. Her chest felt heavy. Exposing this would mean stepping into a fight she wasn't prepared for. Remaining silent meant carrying knowledge that would eat at her every day. Either choice came with consequences she wasn't sure she could survive. Noah slept soundly in the nursery, his small frame curled around a stuffed fox. She pressed a hand against the glass wall, staring at him. He was the reason she had taken this job. He was the reason she had swallowed her pride and stepped into a world that was never meant for her. Could she risk that stability now? Her phone buzzed. A message appeared. "Jackson, you've been quiet? Found something, didn't you?" She hesitated, typing slowly. "I don't know if I should say anything. This isn't small, and if I'm right, it could put me at risk." A moment later, "Risk is unavoidable. What matters is whether it's worth it." Her throat tightened. "You don't understand what it means for me. This job is all I have. It's the first time in years I've felt safe. I can't lose that." The dots pulsed on the screen before his reply came. "I do understand, more than you think. Because once I had nothing to..." She froze. That wasn't the voice of the untouchable billionaire she had seen online. It was something rawer. Another message followed. Before Helix, before the money, I was just another soldier trying to make ends meet. I married young, thought love was enough to carry us. But she got sick. The bills stacked higher than my paycheck. I sold everything, worked until my hands gave out. And still, I couldn't save her. Mira covered her mouth with her hand, eyes stinging. Jackson? The night I buried her, a stranger paid off the last hospital bill. No fanfare, no explanation. Just a slip of paper saying, some debts are not meant to be carried. I promised myself then, if I ever had the means, I would never ignore someone drowning the way I once was. She blinked against the tears burning her eyes. The echo of his story pressed against her own. Different paths, same wounds. Loss had carved them both, forcing survival when hope seemed impossible. Her reply came slowly. I know what it's like to lose almost everything. To wonder if the world notices when you're breaking. That's what it's been like for me and Noah. The screen lit again. Then you know why I chose you. Because you didn't ask for pity. You asked for a chance. And that's worth more than loyalty from 1,000 executives who look away when the truth is inconvenient. She looked at the file again. The fraudulent payments, the hidden accounts, the name repeated too many times. Fear clawed at her chest, but beneath it was something steadier. She had always been the one overlooked, dismissed as insignificant. But here, right now, she had a choice that mattered. She printed the report, her hands trembling as the machine whirred quietly in the corner. Each page felt heavier than the last, ink bleeding truth that could not be undone. She gathered them into a folder, pressing it tightly against her chest. When she finally walked down the hall, the building was nearly empty. Only one office glowed with light at the end of the corridor. She knocked once before stepping inside. Jackson looked up from his desk, tired eyes sharpening as he saw what she carried. Mira placed the folder in front of him. This is what I found. I don't know what you'll do with it, but I can't stay silent. He didn't reach for the papers right away. Instead, he studied her face, as though weighing not just the evidence, but the cost it had taken to bring it forward. Finally, he nodded once. You did the right thing. Her voice was barely a whisper. Then why do I feel like everything is about to change? Jackson's reply was steady, almost certain. Because it will. The morning after she handed over the folder, the air inside Helix Core shifted. The quiet hum of routine felt tighter, sharper. Mira walked through the halls with Noah in his sling, every nod from employees tinged with unease, as though they sensed the ground moving beneath their feet. Behind the closed doors of the executive boardroom, Jackson Albright sat at the head of the table. The folder she had delivered the night before lay open in front of him. Its pages spread across polished wood. Around him, senior executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They had faced his authority before, but this was different. His silence carried weight heavier than any speech. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but unyielding. For months, money has bled out of this company, millions hidden in plain sight. I asked for loyalty. What I got was theft. No one moved. He slid one page forward, the pattern highlighted in ink. Every fraudulent payment traces back here. One of you signed these approvals. His gaze moved slowly across the table, and you thought no one would notice. The room chilled. A senior vice president paled visibly, throat working as though words might save him. They didn't. Jackson's hand tapped the folder once, final, decisive. You're done here. Security will escort you out. Gasps rippled around the table as the man sputtered protests, but Jackson didn't flinch. He stood, his presence filling the space. Let this be clear to the rest of you. Helix Core does not belong to thieves hiding behind titles. It belongs to integrity, or it belongs to nothing. The door opened, security entered, and the disgraced executive was led away. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jackson gathered the papers and closed the folder. His eyes swept across the board once more. If anyone else believes their position makes them untouchable, consider this your warning. There will not be another. By afternoon, the building buzzed with rumors. Staff whispered in corridors, speculations flying about how the fraud had been uncovered. Names were tossed around, theories traded, but one truth remained hidden: Mira's role. Jackson had made sure of that. When he addressed the staff later that day, the tone was firm, but surprisingly measured. Standing in the central atrium, his voice carried through the glass and steel. Helix Core thrives not because of the few at the top, but because of the eyes and minds willing to see what others ignore. Brilliance doesn't always come from where you expect. And when it shows itself, it deserves recognition. Applause followed, though no one knew who he spoke of. Only Mira, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd with Noah against her chest, understood. He hadn't named her, hadn't exposed her. But in that moment, she felt the weight of his words settle over her. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't poor or desperate or barely surviving. She was valuable. That realization broke something inside her, something she hadn't realized she had carried for so long. For once, she wasn't defined by what she lacked, but by what she could see, what she could do. Later, as the atrium emptied and the staff returned to their offices, Mira lingered near the nursery window. Noah slept peacefully in the crib, a picture of innocence untouched by the turmoil unfolding just floors below. She pressed her forehead to the glass, whispering softly, "Maybe it's finally changing for us." Behind her, footsteps approached. Jackson's reflection appeared faintly in the glass before his voice filled the space. "You did more than you realized today." She turned, her chest tightening. "I didn't do anything. You're the one who stood in front of them. You're the one who made it right." He studied her for a long moment. "I couldn't have without you. You saw what no one else did." Her instinct was to look away, to shrink back into the comfort of invisibility. But his gaze wouldn't let her. It was steady, unwavering, and for once, it didn't feel like scrutiny. It felt like belief. "You've been surviving for so long," Jackson said, his tone quieter now. "But I want you to think about something else. Beyond survival. Beyond just getting through the day." Mira's voice caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable but earnest. "What do you want for your future?" The question hung between them, heavier than any folder, sharper than any discovery she had made. And in that instant, Mira realized the reckoning wasn't just for Helix Core. It was for her too. Mira sat in the quiet of her office, the hum of the monitors fading into the background. Across the glass, Noah slept soundly in the nursery, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. She traced the rim of her coffee mug with her finger, her thoughts circling back to the moment that had started it all. A single text. She had only asked for $50, nothing more. $50 to buy formula, to stop the crying, to keep her baby's stomach full. It had been a mistake, a desperate plea sent to the wrong number. Yet that error had set in motion a chain of events that altered her life in ways she never imagined possible. The irony was not lost on her. She had begged for scraps, but fate had delivered her to the top floor of a tower where her work mattered, where her eyes had exposed corruption no one else had seen, where her value was no longer hidden beneath overdue bills and whispered judgments. That evening, as the office thinned and the city outside glowed against the glass walls, Jackson appeared in her doorway. His presence was quieter now, less like the ghostly mogul the world whispered about, and more like a man who had been waiting for this conversation. "You've done more than you realize here," he said, his voice low but firm. She folded her hands on the desk. "I just did the job." His gaze lingered on her. "No. You did more than the job. You saw through what others ignored. You stood when it was easier to look away. That isn't ordinary, Mira." The words sank deep. She wasn't used to hearing them, not from anyone. For years, her worth had been measured in what she lacked: money, stability, support. To hear it measured now in what she had done, in what she could do, unsettled her in the best way. Jackson stepped forward, sliding a folder onto the desk, not like the temporary one he had offered weeks ago. This was different. Vicar, permanent. 3 months was never the point, he said. This is a full position, audit and compliance, flexible hours, competitive pay, and the nursery, always yours. Consider it not charity but an investment. You've proven yourself already. Her hands trembled as she opened the folder. The number stared back at her, higher than anything she had dreamed of earning. Stability, security, a future. Not just for her, but for Noah. Her first instinct was to push it away. To say no before she could be swallowed by gratitude that might feel too close to debt. But then she looked at Noah through the glass. His small hand twitched in his sleep, reaching for a toy that lay just out of reach, and it struck her. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about building something lasting. She lifted her eyes to Jackson. "I don't want this if it's pity." His reply was steady. "If it were pity, you wouldn't be sitting here." The truth of that settled her doubts. Slowly, she closed the folder and pressed her palm against it. For the first time in years, she wasn't agreeing because she had no choice. She was agreeing because she wanted to build, to grow, to step beyond survival. "I'll take it," she said softly. Jackson gave a small nod, satisfaction flickering across his face. "Then welcome to Helix, Mira. Not as a guest, not as a favor, but as part of what we're building." When he left the office, she turned back toward the nursery. Noah stirred, his tiny body stretching before he settled again into peaceful sleep. She whispered to him through the glass, "We're not just surviving anymore. We're finally living." The realization washed over her. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in refusing help, but in knowing when to accept it. Pride had nearly kept her in the dark, but a single mistake had illuminated a path she never would have found otherwise. A wrong number, $50. That was all it had started with, and now it was everything. Kindness can come from unexpected places. Pride has its place, but so does the courage to let someone step in when the weight is too heavy to carry alone. One wrong text can change a life, not just with money, but with trust, with opportunity, with the reminder that survival is not the end of the story. If stories like this remind you that hope can come from unexpected places, like and subscribe to Souls and Riches Stories. And tell me, if you were in Mira's shoes, would you have trusted that stranger's kindness?